My name is Joseph Edward Smith. I'm 80 years old. I spent most of my life thinking that steady, careful financial habits would make me look successful. They did not. For a long time, they made me look boring. They made me look slow. They even made me feel behind. I was a librarian. I watched people arrive in shiny cars, wearing expensive watches, talking about trips and purchases and upgrades. Meanwhile, I was bringing my lunch to work, driving cars until they were tired, and sending money to savings before I spent a dime on myself. You see, I thought discipline would feel impressive. Honestly, most of the time it just felt quiet. And in a loud country, quiet can make a man think he is losing. That was my mistake. I was measuring myself against displays. I was not measuring myself against reality. When I finally looked at the real numbers, not the show people put on, I understood something that shocked me. I was not behind. In many ways, I was far ahead of average, and most people who live the way I lived may be too. Let me explain, because what I found out changed how I saw money, retirement, and peace of mind. I grew up in a house where money was never discussed in fancy language. We did not talk about leverage or portfolio allocation. We talked about whether the bills could be paid. I still remember my father coming home from the mill when I was a boy and saying the work was drying up. I saw his face. I saw what fear looked like on a good man who had done everything he was told to do. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment stayed in me for the rest of my life. It made me careful. It made me suspicious of anything that looked rich on the outside but weak underneath. Years later, after I became a librarian, I saw the same thing in a different form. I saw people who looked comfortable and successful, but I also knew many of them were carrying debt. I knew some of them had no cushion at all, and here's what I didn't understand then. A great many responsible people feel poor only because irresponsible spending is so visible. That is the first thing I want to confess. I used to compare my life to appearances. I knew better, but I still did it. I would see a neighbor with a new vehicle. I would see a coworker remodeling a kitchen. I would hear about boats, vacations, furniture, gadgets, all the toys people buy to prove to themselves that life is going well. And for a second, I would feel it. I would think, Joseph, have you been too strict? Have you waited too long? Have you missed something? You know what surprised me most? The people who looked the most settled were not always the people who were the most secure. Anybody can drive something expensive if a bank will approve the loan. Anybody can fill a house with things if they are willing to live on payments. Anybody can perform wealth for a season. Very few people can sit still, save money, invest it, and let time do its work. When I started looking at the actual numbers in this country, I felt two things at once. First, I felt relief. Second, I felt concern. I felt relief because I realized many disciplined people are doing better than they think. I felt concern because average financial life in America is more fragile than most people want to admit. There is nothing wrong with being an average person. I was an average man in many ways. I worked a public job. I wore good but ordinary clothes. I never became flashy. But average financial statistics in this country can leave a person exposed, and that is the part no one likes to say out loud. Let me start with the most basic layer, emergency savings. I learned early that the first job of money is not to impress anyone. The first job of money is to protect you when life turns suddenly. A job loss, a wrecked car, a furnace that dies in winter, a medical bill that shows up at the wrong time. I always believed a household needed some space to breathe, not luxury, breathing room. Yet when I studied the numbers, I saw that nearly 2/3 of Americans had no emergency fund at all, no real buffer, no small wall between daily life and disaster. Think about that. If work stopped, many people would start sliding immediately. Rent would become fear. Groceries would become math. Sleep would become difficult. You see, when I realized that, I also realized something else. If I had even a few months of basic expenses saved, I was already above a huge share of the country. Not because I was brilliant, because the bar was lower and sadder than I had imagined. I remember the first emergency fund Catherine and I built. It was not dramatic. It did not feel like winning. We kept money in savings while friends around us upgraded things. We looked stable, but not exciting. Honestly, sometimes that bothered me. Then life tested us. The car needed work, the roof needed repair, a family member needed help. Because we had cash, those problems stayed problems. They did not become crises. That is a huge difference. People who have never lived without a buffer may not understand that. I do. I remember what it felt like to solve a problem without panic. I remember the quiet that came with it. Then I looked at simple savings, not investments, not retirement, just savings. The numbers were even more startling. About 1/3 of Americans reported having no money at all in a savings account. Half had less than $1,000. Less than 1,000. That number stayed with me. It bothered me. And it also opened my eyes. Because many people who faithfully keep even a modest cushion think they are failing. They see others spending, so they assume others must have more. But the visible spender is not always the solid saver. I didn't know it at the time, but one of the strongest advantages I ever built was invisible. It sat quietly in accounts nobody clapped for. That is why I tell people the building blocks matter. First, protect yourself with an emergency fund. Second, build basic savings. Third, prepare for retirement. Most people want to jump past the first blocks because they are not exciting. They want the final picture before the foundation is poured. I understand that feeling. I had it too. But I learned that wealth is often nothing more than boring things done long enough. I was a librarian. I never earned a fortune. I built one, and I built it by respecting order. Protection first, savings second, investing third. That order saved me from many foolish choices. Now let me tell you the number that really changed how I saw the country. Retirement balances. When I studied median 401k balances, I had to read some of the figures twice. The median balance for all account holders was under $35,000. Under $35,000. And that number only included people who had accounts. There were many others with nothing at all. So if a person had $36,000 in a retirement account, that person was already above the median among account holders. That is the part that shook me. So many people feel behind, but the statistical middle is much weaker than the culture admits. Then I looked at the age ranges. For people in their 20s, the median balance was about $5,000. For those in their 30s, about $6,000. For those in their 40s, around $32,000. For those in their 50s, around $53,000. Let that sit with you. A person can work for decades, do his best, and still arrive in his 50s with retirement savings that may not last long at all. And here's what I didn't understand then. The danger is not only poverty. The danger is false comfort. A person can think, I have something, therefore I must be okay. But retirement is expensive. Life is expensive. Years are long. Hope is not a strategy. When I first saw that number for people in their 50s, $53,000, I pictured it in real life. I pictured utilities, food, insurance, taxes, maintenance, medicine, repairs, simple pleasures, and the ordinary cost of being alive. I asked myself how long that money would really last. Not long. Maybe a few lean years, depending on circumstances. Maybe less. And that was before I added the fact that the average Social Security check was about $1,800 a month. Combine a modest retirement balance with an average monthly check, and many people are facing a very thin retirement. That is not judgment. That is math. This is where my feelings changed. I stopped asking whether I looked rich. I started asking whether I was secure. Those are two different questions. Looking rich is mostly theater. Being secure is structure. Looking rich gets attention. Being secure gets sleep. I chose sleep. Not every day, not perfectly, but often enough that time helped me more than time hurt me. You see, saving is hard. I will never insult people by pretending otherwise. People sacrifice for every dollar they keep. I did. Catherine did. We passed on things. We delayed things. We said no more times than anyone saw. But once I accepted that money needed a system, my life got clearer. I began with a budget. Necessities first. Housing, food, utilities, transportation, then the wants, then the future. And when the future line was too small, I adjusted the wants. Not because I hated pleasure, because I loved peace more. If a person saves nothing, I believe 10% is a strong beginning. Not because 10% is magic, but because it creates identity. It turns a person into someone who pays his future self. Once that habit exists, it can grow. 15% is better. 20% is better still, if life allows it. When I received raises, I tried not to hand all of them to my present life. I let some of each raise go forward in time to the old man I would become. I am that old man now. I am grateful for every one of those decisions. But I must say something else. Saving alone is not enough. I learned that lesson in library books before I learned it in brokerage statements. Money must be invested because inflation is always eating. Cash that sits too long loses power. And that is where compounding changed my life. At first the gains seemed small, almost insulting. Then years passed. Then the returns started earning returns. Then the growth became less about my effort and more about time. Honestly, that was one of the most hopeful ideas I ever learned. A person can make one good choice and let it keep helping him. Of course, the opposite is true too. If money grows slower than inflation, the damage compounds the other way. Loss of purchasing power can be quiet, but it is brutal over time. I remember difficult years too. Years when inflation was high. Years when markets were ugly. Years when it felt easier to stop. But I kept thinking long term, not 1 year, 7 years, 10 years, a lifetime. Let me explain. Short periods can lie to you. Long periods tell the truth. That idea kept me steady. It may keep you steady too. So here is my confession now, at 80. I spent years feeling behind when I was actually building something rare. I thought modest living made me look small. In truth, it made me sturdy. I thought saying no to visible luxuries meant I was missing life. In truth, I was buying freedom a little at a time. And when I compare my choices to the real numbers, not the fake signals people show each other, I can say this clearly. If you have an emergency fund, if you keep savings, if you are investing for retirement with intention, you may already be far above average. Not above average in ego, above average in readiness. You know what surprised me most? Once I understood the statistics, I did not feel proud. I felt responsible. Because if a person learns this and still does nothing, time becomes expensive. But if a person learns this and starts now, even imperfectly, progress can begin today. That is the good news. Nobody has to become dramatic. Nobody has to become brilliant. A person can become consistent. That is enough to change a life. I also want to say something for the person who hears all this and feels ashamed. I have known that feeling too. I have sat at my kitchen table with numbers in front of me and thought, Joseph, you should have done more by now. You should have started earlier. You should have known better. Shame is a poor financial planner. It makes a person freeze. It makes a person avoid statements, avoid budgets, avoid hard talks with a spouse, avoid truth itself. I learned that progress begins when I stop trying to protect my pride and start protecting my future. That is a hard sentence, but it is true. The day I could look at my numbers without drama was the day my life became more manageable. When Marcus was young, I taught him a lesson I wish every adult learned early. I told him that money has 4 jobs. First, it pays for life now. Second, it protects life when life goes wrong. Third, it grows, so that future work does not all have to come from our hands. Fourth, it gives us choices. That fourth part matters more with age than people realize. Choice is what money becomes when it is handled well. Choice to leave a bad job. Choice to help a child. Choice to fix a car without fear. Choice to retire before the body gives out. Choice to say no. Choice to rest. I think many people chase money when what they really want is choice, dignity, and a little calm. That is why average financial statistics scare me. They are not just numbers on a page. They are warnings about how little room many people have. A person with no emergency fund is one surprise away from panic. A person with almost nothing in savings is one inconvenience away from borrowing. A person with a small retirement balance may reach later life and discover that work is no longer a preference. It is a necessity. I saw this around me more than once. I knew people who stayed in jobs not because they loved the work, but because the bills would not stop. I knew people who retired too early without enough planning and became anxious. I knew people who delayed every honest look at money until the options became smaller. I never judged them. I simply paid attention. Their stories taught me almost as much as my own. And let me be fair here. Not every problem can be solved with discipline alone. Some people are carrying medical costs, family burdens, job loss, divorce, bad luck, low wages, and years of pressure that no tidy advice can erase. I know that. I would never look into a camera and pretend that every person can save the same way. Life is uneven. Some people are running uphill in boots. Still, I believe this with all my heart. Even when the gap is wide, the right direction matters. A small emergency fund is better than none. $100 saved is better than zero. A first retirement contribution matters. A budget that tells the truth matters. Starting late is still starting. I have lived long enough to know that small, steady acts can rescue a person from the despair that comes from doing nothing. I also learned that comparison never ends on its own. There is always a bigger house, a newer car, a richer friend, a louder vacation, a grander story. If I build my peace on winning that race, I will die tired. If I build my peace on preparedness, gratitude, and useful habits, I can sit at my own table and feel enough. At 80, enough is one of the most beautiful words I know. It took me decades to understand that fully. I want to leave you with this. If my story helped you breathe a little easier, stay with me. I share these lessons because I know how easy it is to feel late, embarrassed, or discouraged. I have felt all three. So if you recognized yourself in what I said, press like, leave me a comment, and tell me where you stand right now. I read those comments because I care about real people, not just numbers. And if you want more honest guidance in plain language, subscribe, because I am still here, still learning, and still telling the truth as simply as I can. I would also urge you to keep going after this. Do not stop with one video and one moment of relief. Learn what retirement income really looks like. Learn why many people should retire as soon as they reasonably can. Keep building your understanding the same way you build savings, one steady deposit at a time. I am 80 now. I cannot go back and start younger. But I can reach across this camera and tell you what I wish more people had told me. You do not need to look wealthy. You need to become safe. And once you become safe, you can begin to feel rich in the ways that matter.